They have the technical capacity to build or produce enriched uranium at weapons levels. And it will take them probably somewhere between 1.5 and 3 years to go to that point.
America have had a very difficult relationship, ups and downs, a lot of negotiations, and yet no middle ground where they can work out their differences. How has it panned out for all these years? What's happened? Is Iran on the verge of making a nuclear bomb? What's the threat for the United States of America and for the region? And how has Iran been able to manage its economy despite all the sanctions against it from the United States of America? To discuss all this and more, I have a special guest with me on Statecraft. Trita Parsi, a man who's been following the diplomatic talks between Iran and the United States of America since Obama, and even before that, since President Obama's days. That's his book. He's been on the subject of Iran and has been has been watching Iran very, very, very closely. Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining me here on India Today Global. Let's just begin with the fact that there is a threat perception that Iran is very close to making a bomb. The IAEA chief who I interviewed, Rafael Grossi, said that they had reached enrichment levels that can clearly make a nuclear bomb. In your appreciation and your reading of the situation on the ground, how close is Iran?
I think it's first, let me thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Let me first clarify one point that I think is very important to understand. They have the technical capacity to build or produce enriched uranium at weapons levels. And they have enough of significantly high enriched uranium to be able to produce enough material for one bomb, probably within 3 to 7 days. However, having the material for a bomb, the fissile material for a bomb, and having a bomb are two very different things. And it will take them probably somewhere between 1.5 and 3 years to go to that point. And even more importantly, according to the US intelligence services, which is echoed by European and other intelligence services, they have not made a decision to build a bomb. So they're currently not active in a weapons program, but they are producing material that could be used for that. So that in and of itself is, of course, a challenge, but I don't think it is a cause for panic. There is still plenty of time to be able to resolve this and to resolve this in a very satisfactory way. The problem is that from the Israeli perspective, they prefer a military confrontation, even if it potentially would lead Iran to building a bomb, rather than some form of a deal between the United States and Iran that not only prevents a nuclear weapon, but actually brings about a better relationship between the United States and Iran.
That's a very interesting point. Let's just stick to that. Why do you say that the Israelis, for whom they keep continuing to harp on the fact that it's an existential threat, why do you think that they'd be willing to go into a military conflict as opposed to maybe looking at normalization of ties?
Yeah. I think that is really the key question. And first of all, I think we have to recognize that the Israelis say that this is an existential threat. Their conduct is not revealing that they actually believe it is an existential threat. And you have several key officials in Israel, 3 Mossad heads in a row, from Ephraim Harvey to Pardo to Meir Dagan, who were on record saying the program is not an existential threat to Israel. Ehud Barak, who's kept on saying over and over again, it's not an existential threat because it really diminishes Israel's power, and Israel's power is very, very significant. The reason why the Israelis rather have a confrontation than a deal is because from their standpoint, they look at this and they say, if there is a deal and it prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, it will reduce US-Iran tensions. It will enable the United States to leave the Middle East militarily, reduce its military power there significantly. But will that necessarily lead to a proportionate reduction in tensions between Iran and Israel? And their conclusion, in my view, incorrectly, is that it won't. And it means to them that Iran will remain a threat, a challenge for the Israelis, even though they will have improved relations with the US. The US will lose interest. It will leave the region. It will focus on Asia, on China. And as a result, this kicks in the Israeli fear of abandonment, that they will be left alone in the region, facing Iran, with no longer having this type of automatic American support because the US has reduced its tension, not necessarily resolved it fully, but is no longer on top of the agenda in the manner that it has been for some time. It's important also to keep one thing in mind. When you take a look at what the Israeli military option is, and this is very important to understand what I said just earlier, the Israeli military option would push back the Iranian program 1 year. The JCPOA pushed it back a minimum of 10 years. If the weapons is truly the problem for the Israelis, why are they preferring an option that pushes it back 1 year, destabilizes the region, creates all kinds of unpredictable repercussions, to one that would have pushed it back 10 years, probably even longer?
Okay, we will talk about the negotiations because the 2 rounds that are already over. Wednesday, we'll have the technical talks. But before that, again, right side of history, wrong side of history, internal politics and dynamics of Iran led to a lot of criticism, invited a lot of sanctions for Iran. But today, as we sit, and we're looking at the Palestine crisis, we're looking at Gaza, and we look at countries that have actually come out absolutely supporting the people of Gaza. It's not the Sunni Arab world, it's the Shia Iran that actually is supporting and backing the cause for Palestine.
To a certain extent, that is true. I think we have to make a distinction between Arab governments and Arab populations. I don't think for a second that the populations in the Arab world, in the Sunni Arab world, are not extremely supportive of the Palestinians and extremely upset. You just take a look at Morocco. There's been ongoing massive demonstrations in the country that actually normalize relations with Israel because the populations are not at all in any way, shape, or form happy. In the case of Turkey, now, of course, I think the Turks are playing a double game similar to what the Iranians played with Israel 40, 50 years ago. It is true that in terms of when it comes to this armed resistance, the support is primarily coming from Iran. It's not coming from any of the Arab states in that sense. But I think the picture is very complicated. And if there is a deal between the United States and Iran on the nuclear issue, it will be very interesting to see how that will affect or not affect Iran's position on Israel and Palestine. I think already at this stage, the belief that the path to victory for them is through arms resistance is definitely taking quite a beating because it's not working out the way that they necessarily hoped. On the other hand, there is no willingness to succumb to what the Israelis are doing right now, which is the ethnic cleansing of all of Palestine, not just Gaza. I think more than anything else, the question is, where is the rest of the world? Where is Europe? Where is the West? That for so much argued the moral standpoint in terms of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and then completely threw those morals down the drain as soon as the Israelis started to behaving much worse than the Russians did in Ukraine.
One of the Palestinians I was speaking with, an activist, an author, a professor herself, and she said, you know, the color of our skin really matters. It is different when it's Ukrainian, it's different when it's a Palestinian. But of course, there are more layers to and complications to how the United States of America looks at Palestine. Having said that, and again, we'll go to the negotiations, but Iran does not depend on nuclear weapons alone, Trita. They have the best drone technology, one of the best in the world. They employ asymmetric warfare. It's not conventional. They have bunkers, underground systems where they have amassed a lot of weapons and weapon systems, very highly sophisticated ones. How strong is Iran actually militarily, or is this just a show that you have a narrative building where you hear people say, you hear it from the Iranian side as well, that they have this, that, and so on and so forth? Do they really have it? How strong are they militarily?
So I think the Israeli argument right now is that because of the defeat of Hezbollah, the collapse of Syria, Iran is remarkably, perhaps uniquely weak in the region compared to previous periods. And I think there is truth to that. There's no doubt that the loss of Assad is a major blow to Iran. The weakening, the compromising of Hezbollah has been a huge blow. All of that was one out of three elements of Iran's deterrence. One was these different groups that were like a first line of defense against Israel. Then you had Iran's missile program, and then you have a potential nuclear deterrence. If one of them is lost, the importance of the other two increases. And when it comes to the missile program, what we can say is that despite the fact that clearly the way that they shot those missiles at Israel on two occasions in April and October of 2024, it was largely meant to show their capacity rather than inflicting damage. I mean, they seem to have gone to great lengths to avoid allowing anyone to get killed. So, but nevertheless, they managed to do something that I think took the Israelis really by surprise. They managed to penetrate all layers of Israel's anti-defense system. So the Arrow 1 and 2, the Patriots, the Sling, all of these different, Iron Dome, were not sufficient to shoot down all of the different missiles. And it was to the extent that the Israelis went to the United States and asked for the deployment of THAAD batteries, which is the most sophisticated anti-missile system that exists. And I think at this stage, the US has 8 of them or so, and they have deployed 2 of them in Israel. They would never have asked for that had it not been for the fact that the Iranian missile capability is quite effective, and they could not entirely withstand that. That, however, does not mean that Iran could win necessarily war. What it means is that a war would be extremely costly, extremely devastating and destabilizing. And we have now, 3 or 4 American presidents that have decided this is not worth it. And if you take a look at the Trump administration's focuses, which is they want to shift their focus increasingly towards China, the argument that has been resonating inside the administration is that this would be such a massive distraction and abuse of resources, loss of resources that they believe they will need for other things. And as a result, the opposition to this is overwhelming within the American military establishment and in the White House right now, at least with the president. What you have, however, is that from the Israeli perspective, they believe if they cannot get this done now, if they cannot convince Trump to do so, it may be their last chance. And they want to do this as soon as possible as well, because they're running against the diplomatic clock. They are quite fearful that the Iranians will be able to entice Trump with a deal that may not be as advanced on the nuclear stage as the previous deal was, but that will offer the United States other things, such as access to the Iranian market, lifting of the primary sanctions, which would be quite attractive, particularly for a businessman like Trump, who's never been a huge fan of these different sanctions. So I think you see a ferocious battle right now taking place, in which the Israelis are doing everything they can to make sure that this deal does not come about.
Well, let's just talk about the enticement then. 2 rounds of talks between Iran and the United States of America. Seems like they've been constructive. Where do you see it headed? And the demands that have been made by Iran, are there red lines over here and no-go areas for Washington, D.C. under Trump?
So we know what the red lines are for the Iranian side, and that is they are not going to dismantle their program. They're going to continue to have enrichment. But they can give guarantees and inspections and verification and insights in order to make sure that it doesn't move towards a weaponization. They're not going to get rid of their missile program either, nor are they going to let the United States dictate who they will have relations with. However, because as I mentioned, those are the 3 pillars of their deterrence. Asking them to give up all 3 essentially is to ask them to have absolutely no defenses whatsoever. That's something you can potentially ask them once you've defeated them militarily. But to ask that up front is a complete non-starter. Now, that doesn't mean that there might not be some elements aspects of the missile program that could be up for discussion, or that, how some of those relationships are going to be conducted can also be up for discussion. Okay. But the core of it is going to be the nuclear program. Trump has said something very important. He has said that his only red line is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, which means he prioritizes the nuclear program. He does not prioritize the missile program. He does not prioritize the situation in the region, relations with the Houthis, etc. That doesn't mean that he doesn't think those are important. That doesn't mean that he doesn't put them or try to have a conversation with the Iranians about it or a negotiation down the road. But his priority is the nuclear program, which makes sense because that's the one that actually could be a challenge for the United States. The rest of it may be a challenge for Israel, for other states in the region, but Trump has to pursue US interests first rather than allowing Israeli interests dictating what he's doing.
Okay, we're absolutely running out of time. I know you have to go, but before I let you go, nuclear program, not having nuclear weapons systems and going nuclear in terms of arms is something that could be acceptable for Iran. They do not want to stop enrichment. They have always cited civil nuclear program for power, for energy security, so on and so forth. Is there a middle ground that they could find in really cutting a deal? And in that deal, knowing how resource rich Iran is, could Trump then be looking at Iranian resources as well? We've seen what's happened with Russia and Ukraine.
I think so. I think absolutely there is a pathway to a deal because as long as, of course, the Iranians adopt reasonable positions and the US does the same. If either one of them start adopting maximalist positions, that's when you will see the talks likely fail. So for instance, from the American side, Trump seems to have gone for a verification solution rather than a dismantlement of the program. The next things that the hawks are throwing in there is to say there should be no sunsets. There should be nothing in the deal that expires. That's also not going to work. It's already been tried. If you push for that, you'll likely get no deal. And it's no surprise that the person who is, for instance, within the administration pushing for that is Marco Rubio, who has expressed inside the debate a more favorable view towards military action. Okay. So there's still a tremendous risk of these excessive maximalist demands. If that's what they pursue, there will not be a deal. But if they are pursuing what they're doing right now, then I think there is a clear pathway to a deal. And one important difference between now and 2015 is that 2015, this deal, the JCPOA had an overwhelming support in the world. Only 3 countries opposed it, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. Today, the Saudis and the Israelis are strongly supporting a deal. They're even trying to help mediate a deal. The only country that is left opposing it is Israel, which is a big difference between now and 2015.
Very interesting. The dynamics are changing. My final question to you, if you could zoom out a little and talk about the support that Iran has, not just from the region, because the smaller countries from China and Russia. Should there be a situation, and that's the reading of the room when it comes to Trump administration as well. If there is an escalation, then there is China and Russia also for the West to face. Is that a scenario? Is that something that has been read and studied in detail?
I think neither Russia nor China in any way, shape, or form want to see a war. But also, I don't think in any shape or form they want to be part of that war. If there is a war, I cannot foresee that the Chinese or the Russians would provide any particular support. They might sell some weapons and things of that nature, but the idea that they would enter the war, I think, is essentially out of the question. That's not what's going to happen. But it will be a war that likely will have such a destabilizing effect on the region as a whole that it will affect everyone. And it will affect Europe, because if you start seeing massive refugee flows once more out of the Middle East, they're not going to go to the United States. They're not going to go to Asia. They're going to go to Europe. And Europe has a clear interest in making sure that this deal is struck. The European position, however, has become complicated for 2 reasons. On the one hand, the Europeans are cut out of the deal. They're not at the table. This is deeply upsetting to them, but they were also cut out of Ukraine, and Ukraine is even more important for them. But the other aspect of it is the deal that Trump seems to be pursuing has a Russian component to it. Russia is likely going to play some sort of a nuclear role as part of this deal, potentially hosting Iran's low-enriched uranium. I think the Europeans are worried that this will further normalize Russia, that this will once again bring Russia out from the cold in a way that the Europeans do not want unless there is a satisfactory solution to the Ukraine problem. The challenge the Europeans have, of course, they have no pathway to what they call a satisfactory solution to Ukraine. So for 3 years, they've been just doubling down on a military option that is not even their own option. It's based on the US supporting it. And the United States at this point is no longer in the mood of doing so. So Europe has really put itself in a very, very difficult bind. And it's also affecting this issue, even though the Europeans played a critical role in getting the previous deal.
You've been following the negotiations, Trita. Iranians are known to be some of the best negotiators in the world. Do you think Trump administration and their negotiators have the skill set to deal with Iran? My final question.
I think that the skill set, negotiation-wise, is there. Whether they have the technical knowledge to be able to match what the Iranians have, because the Iranian team is the same team that negotiated, not just with Obama, but also later on with Biden. So they know the files very, very well. The American negotiators, at least the top negotiators, are very new to this issue. And the extent to which the Trump administration will use the technical expertise that exists within the government, despite the fact that those individuals played a role in the JCPOA, remains to be seen. As you know, that is a sensitive topic for Trump.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us over here. This is a special edition of Statecraft where we're talking about Iran and how close is Iran to making a nuclear bomb. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you so much for having me.